Thank you, folks, for joining us for the September PSA seminar. We really appreciate all of our presenters that we've had throughout the year. We have a continued really great lineup for the next few months following. And today we're really fortunate to have Kayleen Satano presenting about the research that she and Mickey Swisher have been doing at the University of Florida, stakeholder-driven adaptive research, insights from the PSA Farmer Think Tank. So Kayleen, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks everyone for attending. Nikki is actually teaching right now, so she's not able to be here, but thanks for recording so she can check it out later. She'll probably be here toward the end of our discussion, might be able to field some questions. I'm going to be giving a presentation at the upcoming Tri-Societies meeting, and so this is a little snapshot of what I'll be presenting there. Stakeholder-driven adaptive research is a term that Mickey and her team kind of coined for the research that they do, and I'll get to that later. But today we're going to talk about what we've been learning from our PSA Farmer Think Tank meetings. We are part of the social science team, so we meet with Jen and the rest of the social science team members once a month, and that's where we're mostly sharing what we're learning and what we're doing. Our activities in this project are to recruit and host the Farmer Think Tank meetings, and I'll get into a little more detail about what we do in those meetings in a minute. We also host field research assessments. We have completed 2 so far in this project. One was with Common Experiment 1 at the West Florida Research and Education Center station in Jay, Florida. And we recently, this year, we've completed our second one with Common Experiment 2 at the Plant Science Research and Education Unit, which is in Citra, Florida, north central Florida, US, or the north central part of the state in Florida. And we also are doing research assessment trainings, trying to tell people what research assessments are and then kind of tell them how to maybe do them. So we've done one training with the Northeast Cover Crop Council with their conference 2 years ago. And we just gave an overview of what a research assessment is and what it means to conduct one. We will be developing future trainings, which will get a little bit more into how to actually do one. So I hope today, after you hear a little more about what we're doing, you'll be interested in participating in one of those trainings. One of our biggest activities that we've done so far and takes up most of the time of our work is the Farmer Think Tank. We reached out to the on-farm contacts in each state that are participating in the PSA on-farm trial. And we asked them to recommend 1 or 2 of the farmers participating in the on-farm trial to participate in our meetings. And the first year we recruited 4 states. I'm sorry, we did 5. Georgia, North Carolina, Delaware, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. One of the farmers participated in both meetings that year. We do 2 meetings a year, and then opted to not continue this year when we did our next 2 meetings. So when we moved on to 2022, we had a total of 8 farmers. And the additional farmers represented Vermont, South Carolina, Kansas, and Wisconsin. All of our farmers have anywhere from 5 to 20 years of experience growing cover crops. It's been really interesting talking to them and learning from them, and they're learning a lot from each other as well, which is kind of an unintended outcome. So we're working with a really awesome group of farmers to start with. The general format for our meetings is prior to the first meeting, when we recruited our first 5 farmers, I contacted them all individually and got background information, figure out where they were from, what do they farm, and how many years have they been cover cropping. And then we also wanted to know, why did you start cover cropping? So when we came to that first meeting, I was able to have their slide up that gave all that background information to everybody, and then they elaborated on why they started cover cropping. And the overwhelming response was to control for soil erosion issues. That was why they started. And then there have been cascading benefits ever since then. But they pretty much all shared the same idea of wanting to address their soil erosion issues. And then we always ask them for their on-farm trial update. So I also get with them before the meeting to figure out what exactly their cover crop trial is on their farm. And then they can just provide us an update on if they've had any successes or challenges. And they usually share what cover crop mix they're using. After the first meeting, the farmers wanted to know the actual seeding rates. So for meeting 3, we got all of their seeding rates, so they were able to discuss that with each other. And then after they give us our on-farm trial update, we let the farmers have an open discussion with each other to ask questions about why they might have chose the crops that they chose or the seeding rate that they chose. And then we move on to our planned discussion questions that are developed by Mickey and me. And then we usually consult our Florida team partners to see, we have Dr. Carlene Chase is leading Common Experiment 2 in Florida. It was Dr. Mike Mulvaney leading Common Experiment 1, but Dr. Pratap Devkota has taken over. And then Dr. Danielle Treadwell is leading the on-farm trials. So we try to consult with them. We also have our own monthly team meetings where we meet as the Florida team. So we incorporate their ideas into our instrument as well. Now I want to go into the specific discussion questions we brought up in meeting 1 and some of the feedback that we got from the farmers. I'm also going to put in the chat right now while I'm thinking about it. It's an article that Mickey and one of her PhD students published regarding stakeholder-driven adaptive research and all the aspects of it and how they applied it in another project that was related to organic strawberry. The general overview of it is we're trying to bring together experiential knowledge from the farmers and combine that with the experimental knowledge that the researchers have. And we want to bring stakeholders, which are typically farmers, we want to bring them into the research, design, implementation, and assessment so that they are fully incorporated into the research project, since they will ultimately be the end users. And some examples of like things that they've helped us identify that contribute to our research is in the strawberry project, they were looking at different cultivars. So when they would have the farmers come out and assess them, the farmers were able to say at the end of the assessment, don't keep looking at this cultivar. We're not going to use it on our farm for these reasons. And that was very helpful to the researchers to just stop looking at that cultivar and stop trying to push that as a possible cultivar for the farmers. So that's kind of where we're trying to go. We want their information to help tease out or improve our research design or help us with future research projects if the idea can't be implemented right now. So for meeting 1, our first discussion question was asking them what benefits do they receive from utilizing cover crops? And I gotta pull up my notes. Okay. Sorry, sometimes 2 screens just still isn't enough. Okay. We asked them if they received any benefits from utilizing cover crops. Overwhelming, the answer was yes. A few of them had noted that they had tried moving to no-till before using cover crops to address soil erosion issues, but that wasn't good enough. That didn't help enough. So that's why they had to ultimately move on to cover crops. And that really seemed to do the trick. They haven't like moved on to some other reason to help with soil erosion. One of the farmers has increased his soil organic matter by 1/10 of a point each year. Some of them started talking about using less fertilizer, using less herbicide, using having better soil moisture from year to year. Also using less insecticides. So we started to notice some of these themes coming up of, oh, they're also saving money by utilizing these cover crops. We'd also ask them, does using a cover crop solve a problem on your farm? And again, we had talked about soil erosion, but we had also heard that the streams were running more often because their infiltration was increasing in the soil. So they were noticing improvement in streams on their farm. Again, they talked about cutting back pre-emergent herbicide. Some of them did talk about they were starting to have some nematode issues, so they had to be mindful of what cover crop species they were utilizing, and that has changed some of the decisions that they've made in their cover crop program. And then we also, we asked them about equipment, but I didn't think that was a really exciting question to share, so I'm going to move on to meeting 2. So in meeting 2, during both meeting 1 and meeting 3, when we have new farmers or we're adding new farmers, the meeting tends to focus a little more on just getting to know each other. And also the meetings were only scheduled for an hour and a half, which we found out was not a lot of time when farmers really like talking to each other. So some of these discussions unfortunately got cut a little bit short, but for meeting 2, we got to have a lot more of a discussion that was led by the farmers. We again got their on-farm trial updates and learned about what was going well, what wasn't going well on the farm. That year, typically most things have to do with weather. Sometimes they have a really wet spring and they had issues. Sometimes they had a really dry streak. So that's typically what we're talking about when we do their on-farm trial updates. It's not really anything specific to the trial itself. And then our discussion for the meeting 2, we presented the Northeast cover crop selection tool and asked for feedback about how to improve it, because we were asked to do that to help with the Southeast Cover Crop Council cover crop selection tool. Some of the feedback we got was they thought the ability to compare cover crops would be valuable. One of the main feedback we got, which we thought would be a really great idea, was the farmers would like there to be a button to almost talk to an expert. So if there's a specific cover crop that you are interested in, you could either maybe contact a researcher or another farmer that uses that cover crop. And I would say mostly they're really interested in talking to other farmers that have experience with the cover crop or even the issue that they're having. So that, I don't know if that's something that could be put in, but that was somebody brought that up and everyone thought that was a good idea. So that you could ask questions that aren't addressed in the selection tool. So I'm reading over all of our feedback notes here. Mostly it was being able to talk to someone that has experience. They were commenting on how their neighbors don't grow cover crops, so they can't really ask them for guidance, which kind of comes back to what has been really cool about these farmer think meetings is we're bringing together these experts or people that really want to learn more and already know a lot about cover crops, and they're able to talk to each other, and it's something that they haven't been able to have previously. We didn't realize that that was going to be so valuable. So that it's one of the coolest things that we've had, and we would like to keep doing more of these farmer meetings on Zoom where we can bring together people from different areas to talk to each other and learn from each other. We also asked them about which economic indicators have been positively impacted using cover crops. Again, we heard the feedback from the first meeting, so we wanted to kind of ask it again a little bit more specifically and see what new answers we might have gotten. Again, a lot of it was they were reducing inputs. They were reducing passes on the tractor, which reduced their fuel usage. It was a lot of little things that add up over time because they're not having to do it one pass for pre-emergent, one pass for post-emergent. Another thing that unexpectedly came out of this discussion is a lot of these farmers are really believe in our, like, cover cropping is just one tool in their box. They really have a whole farm system set up where they are trying to build their soil biology. Everything is kind of going into the idea of the soil biology and realizing that if they can, well, they're saying that they feel like if they can build up that soil biology, that kind of buys them insurance against a bad year for weather or anything that could come up. So they're all very focused on soil biology. And then the final question we'd asked in this meeting was, how many years of economic data do farmers need to encourage them to adopt cover crops? So we were trying to target somebody who currently doesn't use cover crops. What would they need to see to convince them that there are economic benefits? They generally said it needed to be a 3 to 5 year trial. One person noted that drought years would be most important because they would really probably see more benefits in drought years than in a wet season. And one farmer suggested doing 20-acre trials on farms where 10 acres was with a high biomass cover crop and 10 acres was with their standard practice. They thought researchers could take whatever data they wanted, but the farmer managed the trial just as they would manage their normal field. And then if we tracked the economics each year, that he thought that would be a good way to show the benefits that you're getting from year to year and as they increase as the years go on. So that's what we got out of meeting 2. In meeting 3, again, we added in 4 new farmers. So it was a little bit of get to know each other. We still had our 1.5-hour long meeting, now with 8 farmers. So it was very compressed for time. So most of the discussion was led by the farmers themselves. We didn't have as many discussion questions planned. And this discussion went on for a while. Again, we introduced everyone to the new farmers, learned why they started cover cropping. We then got their on-farm trial updates. So we got updates from our existing think tank members, and then we learned about our new trials from our added-in farmers. And then there was a big discussion of follow-up questions. Follow-up questions from previous meetings, like, oh, I remember you said you're having a nematode issue. How did that go this season? Or I had an issue with nitrogen this year planting corn into my grass. Does anyone else have that issue? So this meeting was mostly just the farmers asking their own questions of the other farmers. And then we were learning a lot from them of what was interesting to them. And something else we noticed in the project over time is that people that maybe didn't use as many mixes in the beginning started to add in more mixes as they were learning about them from other farmers. We also learned when we added in some of our new farmers that not everyone's able to do mixes given their climate. If they're very far north, it seems like it, and depending on their operation, some of them can only use one option of a cover crop. So while they wanted to try and do mixes and they understood the benefits, they just weren't able, that's a limitation for them on their farm in their cover cropping program. And then we did our only planned discussion was we asked some questions that we were trying to get feedback about the on-farm trials and the think tank meetings. And what we got about the on-farm trials was that a lot of them, we've discussed this in our social science meeting, but not a lot of them are either accessing their farmer data or they're not understanding. It's not in a format that is easily accessible for them. Or it's just too much. They just want it given to them and not have to try and go on the dashboard and figure it out. So that was one thing we got back about the on-farm trials, was that they'd like to be able to see their data a little more easily. And then the main thing they wanted from our think tank meetings was to increase the meeting length. So we decided to double the meeting length for meeting 4, and we held a 3-hour meeting. And I didn't think that we were going to fill out the time, but somehow the farmers just kept it going. So we had a really great 4th meeting. We had a lot more discussion questions planned. Given our current situation with the economy and prices going up, we really wanted to focus in on the economics and see if, even though prices went up this year, did they still save money by using cover crops? And they all said yes. I have some of their comments here. So as I had said before, they had reduced their pre-emergent herbicide. They were going half rate this time. Again, somebody didn't have to do one pass of pre-emergent herbicide or a pass of post-emergent herbicide that they typically have to do. Somebody else had a comment about saving on pre-emergent herbicide with soybeans. One of our farmers actually reduced their nitrogen for their corn, and they also cut out some of the chemicals that they used on soybeans. They only needed to use Roundup this year instead of another type of herbicide. Not every single farmer gave their specific savings, but they all said yes, and those were the specific comments that we got from them. We also asked them if they participated in any cost share programs for their cover crop. Most of them said yes, and then the ones that said no were like, oh, maybe I should look into that next year. So they were going to look into their cost share programs. And this wasn't as interesting, but we also asked them if they had crop insurance for their cover crops, and we were wondering if there was any complications with having crop insurance with cover crops, but everyone said no, that they're independent of each other and it doesn't present any complication with their crop insurance. So that was something that we had been wondering as a team. And then another question we asked was, do you think, well, I didn't write this question down. Our first question we had asked was, what data or information do you think is needed to motivate farmers to try using cover crops? Mostly it had to do with economics, but it was about if we could show the nitrogen release, so more fertility data to know how much nitrogen they're getting from their cover crop. That is something they would like to see. And data that would indicate their fertility rates would be reduced, their pesticide and herbicide would be reduced. So somehow being able to document all of these benefits that these farmers have been getting is what we're kind of getting to. Like, they're already experiencing cutting back herbicide and nitrogen, and a lot of them talk about not having to lime their soils anymore, or they don't put any potash out. So if we can work with some of these farmers and figure out a way to document that, I don't know if that's, like a social science endeavor or something, but that would, we're trying to ask the farmers, we understand that the adoption of cover crops are low, and we're trying to ask these farmers that are fully buy into cover cropping, see the benefits, and we're trying to learn from them, how can we convince somebody to utilize cover crops that might be on the fence? So these are some of the items we've gotten back so far. Our future activities in the project will be 2 more think tank meetings. We will stick with our 3-hour meetings unless we're asked to increase them, and we'll try to, I'll be reaching out to all of the additional on-farm contacts that I haven't reached out to in the past to try and get any other farmer on board that wants to get on board. We'll do 1 more field research assessment with the Common Experiment 2 down in Citra, Florida with Dr. Carlene Chase's team. And we will be developing those additional research assessment trainings for anyone that wants to learn more about our field research assessment protocol and how to implement that with your research team. And before I do this, I didn't make a slide for this either. I'll just stick here. We had 5 takeaways that we wanted to summarize, that we're seeing from our 5 meetings. So the first one has to do with, cover crops provide long-term effects and returns. So we feel like potential adopters need to understand that, and then be willing to invest 3 to 5 years to be able to give themselves a good assessment of the benefits of cover crops. The farmers agree, and I've heard, and I'm sure you all have heard, Dr. Mirsky talk about that we can't focus on yield, and all of these farmers agree that yield is not the number one thing that drives them. They want to either keep their yield, or they'll even reduce it if they know that they are saving money in some sort of other way. And they realize that that is a barrier for farmers to think about that differently, because they are so focused on yield. And so that is something we need to move away from. We really need farm specific recommendations. A lot of the farmers, they like learning about research trials on station, but they don't feel like it applies to their farm because their field history is so different. So they feel like on-station trials are beneficial to either maybe non-adopters or new adopters, because it might show what they would expect when they start to adopt cover crops after not using them. But for an experienced cover cropper on farm, especially on their farm, research would be the most beneficial so that they know what will work in their system. Our 4th takeaway was that we should strive to present data back to the farmer in the way that they want it, so that they can actually get their data and hopefully learn from that as well. And that's what the farmers are asking for. And then our 5th takeaway is we feel like we should try and bring more farmer to farmer learning and information sharing, more peer-to-peer learning groups, because this seems to be really beneficial, not only for us learning, but to them as well. They're forming learning networks and also social networks where they reach out to each other outside of our meetings to talk about different things. So, all right. Thanks. I don't know if that was too long, but thanks for listening. Obviously, this is funded by the PSA project. This is Mickey's email, my email. If you have any questions after the discussion that you didn't get out, please feel free to email us.